Although I like to say that I've been reading comics as long as I've been reading, that's not 100% true. There was a little gap between the indiscriminate, omnivorous comics reading of my childhood and my current grey-bearded, salary-obliterating fascination with the medium. Between these two phases of my life was a period from the age of 15 to 23 where I read no comics at all. This wasn't a conscious decision. I didn't one day wake up and say no more comics from now on, but somewhere in my pursuit of being a serious and intellectual reader, I must have felt that there was nothing more comics could offer me. My return to reading comics happened in 3 stages which overlapped. First stage, I discovered new, to me, superhero stories like Watchmen, Kingdom Come, Marvel's, Batman Year One, even The Authority and Ultimate Spider-Man, books that tickled my nostalgia while also demonstrating for me smart and ambitious storytelling within an old favorite of a genre. Second stage, I encountered serious literature with a capital L in comics form. These were books like Mouse by Art Spiegelman, Jimmy Corrigan by Chris Ware, Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, Palestine by Joe Sacco, Ghost World by Daniel Klaus, books that use the comics form to create unique works of slice of life or journalism, tragic fiction, history, or autobiography. And the third stage was reading Akira and Lone Wolf and Cub and Vertigo titles like The Sandman and Saga of the Swamp Thing, works that were neither superhero stories nor realistic fiction or non-fiction. These were undoubtedly mythic and genre works, but they also felt serious and adult and intelligent. So these were the 3 stages of my return to comics, but if I was to identify a stage 4, a stage that sealed the deal after which I was hooked forever, it would be the discovery and reading of one single book, Daytripper by Gabriel and Fabio Moon. This book represents to me a perfect comic story, and in this video, I'll talk about why. Well, I say I'll talk about Daytripper, but it's not actually an easy book to talk about, especially if you want to give nothing away. So I'll divide this into 2 parts. In the first part, I'll avoid any kind of spoiler at all, simply gush about this book in a general way. But because a fair amount of this book's allure lies in a central hook or conceit, I'll, in the second part, give you one piece of information needed to talk about it in a little more detail. If you want to know nothing about the plot or structure at all, which is the way I first read it, I'll let you know when you should turn away. All set? So, without spoilers, Daytripper was originally published in 10 issues by DC's Vertigo Comics imprint and was created by Brazilian twin brothers Gabriel and Fabio Moon, who shared both writing and art duties. And from what I can tell, it wasn't a huge success in its initial single-issue run. But the critical acclaim and popular success that this book enjoys today seems to have come immediately after, when it was collected together in trade paperback, which grabbed both the top spot on the New York Times graphic novels bestseller list as well as multiple Eisner Awards. All of which was more than deserved because Daytripper is a magical work, unlike almost anything else in comics. Here is a list of the most astonishing things to me about this book, which is a list of contradictions. It's an intimate and personal story about one man's life, told in non-linear fragments that feels like a sprawling epic about all of humanity. It's a thoughtful, philosophical book full of questions, but it's also a book full of movement and interaction and conversations between characters. It is almost relentlessly focused on the presence, the inescapability of death, but through it, it's a glowing, luminous celebration of living. It is heavily narrative, but feels light and poetic and musical. In some ways, it repeats itself chapter after chapter, but you're always stunned at how inventive and innovative it is. Another way to put this would be that you always know what's coming, but you're also always surprised. Daytripper is a work of realism and is a work of fantasy, and balances them as uniquely as it balances pain and joy, which feels right because that's how life is. Part reality, part fantasy, pain right next to joy, and this is a book about the beauty of life. In many ways, Daytripper is postmodern and metafictional. By treating all of life as a story, it is not just about life, but also about storytelling. But at the same time, it has no room in it for irony or detachment or snarkiness. It is a sincere and passionate story that focuses entirely on the bonds of love, friendship, family, and how every moment of every day is precious. So when I say Daytripper is a perfect comic story, I don't mean it's the best ever in some form of cheap ranking. I mean it is a story that perfectly brings together a staggeringly wide array of ideas, concepts, and effects in a beautiful to look at, pleasure to read volume. Life, death, living, the bonds between us, the purpose of existence. Daytripper wants to ask and answer questions about all of these and does so triumphantly, but looks like a gorgeous fairy tale doing it. If you've never heard anything about the story and would like to stay that way before you read it, take this as your opportunity to go find the book, read it, and come back for the rest of this video. But if you're okay with knowing more, or if you already have an idea of what the story is about, let's talk a little bit more about it. Daytripper's central character, Brass, is a writer of obituaries for a city newspaper, and the first chapter features at its start an illustrated collage of some of the obits he writes in his particular small details-focused style. But Brass dies at the end of the first chapter at the age of 32, killed as a bystander in a robbery, and the chapter ends with an obituary for him written in his own style. The second chapter begins with him at the age of 21 on a holiday trip with his best friend after college has ended, a trip that was referenced in the first chapter. He meets a girl in the seaside town of Salvador and they spend a romantic night together. Now, this would have seemed to be just a flashback, but at the end of this chapter 2, he dies by drowning, as we are told in another obituary. The third chapter shows us Brass at the age of 28, 7 years after chapter 2, but 4 years before the first chapter, where we see Brass at the end of a relationship with a woman, the same girl he had met in Salvador in the last chapter. The third chapter encompasses a year through which we follow Brass's sadness and loneliness. We see his interactions with his best friend, whom we've seen in previous chapters, and his father too. Towards the end of this year of heartbreak, he sees a woman in a grocery store. Their eyes meet briefly, and later, as he's walking away, he can't stop thinking about her. He runs back to the store to talk to her, but on the way, he's hit by a car. Another obituary tells us of his death at the age of 28. This is when we understand that this story is the story of one man's life through the story of the day he dies. It's just that it could be any day. Life can stop at any point of time, which is where the chapter stops, or it could go on. The rest of the chapters in Daytripper work in the same way. We, the readers, flip through Brass's life, sometimes seeing him as a child, sometimes an old man, sometimes middle-aged. Piece by piece, moment by moment, a whole life is put together for us, all through the lens of that life ending. Over the course of these 10 chapters, we see Brass's relationship with his father and with his son sometimes blossom, sometimes never have a chance to grow. We see him with his wife and with his best friend in times of soaring happiness and crushing tragedy. We see his dreams fulfilled or never come to fruition. But these are not quite alternate realities. It's unmistakably the same one life, just stopping at different junctures. And through this mechanism, authors Ba and Moon paint a soulful portrait of existence, of how fleeting even the longest lives can be, how rich even the shortest ones are. Daytripper, in bits and pieces, not only fills in for us Brass's life and character as loving husband, father, best friend, successful author, but also offers commentary on the beauty of all life. If any day could be your last, it seems to ask, can't any day also be a great story? Therefore, isn't all of life just a series of lovely and poignant stories. Daytripper to me is a perfect comic, not only because of its ambition, but because of its execution of that ambition. Because this idea, as wonderful as it sounds, could easily have been sentimental or cliche. Things that ask the reader to fill in stuff from their preconceived notions, pre-digested ideas that we have seen 1,000 times before. It could have been something like live every day like it's your last, but Daytripper is much more elegant, much more generous, and much more wise than that. And it masterfully uses comics elements and conventions to tell a complex and ambitious story without us ever becoming confused or lost. These are the things that make me feel that this story could have only been told in comics. Large numbers at the start of each chapter tell us the age that Brass is, but they obviously also evoke chapter numbers just out of order, adding to the sense that every year of our lives, every day even, is its own chapter. The art is lovely and lush, but also light. One moment it feels solid and grounded and physical, and the very next it is wistful and transitory. This gives us firm anchors in the days that we're reading about, but also seamlessly switches us to other days and other lives. We have not only dialogue and narration in the text, but the obituaries, a central motif, are used as caption boxes that comment on the chapter in its closing moments. This creates an ending, a full stop to the chapter, but also a memoriam, a resonating echo of the story that we just read. Characters age backward and forward, constantly changing who we are looking at, but always keeping them recognizable as the same people we've met before. So through these same but different people, we start enjoying the moments we know may never happen in another chapter, but are happening in the one that we are reading. But because all these and more comic stylings and techniques are used not to show off, see how much we know how to do, but to move the reader from skin to skin, from life to life, they feel almost invisible. The magic of Daytripper lies in how much beauty it is able to see in every day, in the smallest and the most mundane things, and in the honesty of its vision. The death that comes at the end of each chapter becomes inevitable, as all death is, yet in some ways it ceases to matter. You don't care about how Brass is going to die. You start valuing what happens before that end, what he was thinking, what those who love him are doing. You start feeling the absence he will leave, the things that will not be the same after the chapter ends. It would be the most cliche thing to say that this comic forces you to appreciate life as if you and I don't already do so. This comic is not interested in sentimentality. In spite of wearing its heart on its sleeve, it doesn't have that obsession with spelling things out or underlining them. Because it's not interested in lecturing us. It's not here to scold us or to shame us the way that so many email and WhatsApp forwards seem bent on doing. Daytripper is a true celebration of life within its pages, a book that looks at death as simply the frame around life. It is a boundary, perhaps, a chapter's end or a story's end, but the real story is what happens before death, no matter when it happens. Because of its masterful yet invisible use of comics technique and forms, because of how it achieves even its loftiest of goals, and because of the incredible accessibility of its gorgeous art and its heartfelt writing, Daytripper fits perfectly into the bookshelves of both the new comics reader as well as the seasoned comics reader. And that is why I consider it to be a perfect comic story. Like with most of my Spotlight videos, I feel that I've just scratched the surface and I could talk about this for ages, which I'll probably do in a couple of follow-up videos in which I'll look at the single issues, the deluxe edition, and the absolute edition separately. And of course, I'd love to have a conversation with you, whether you've read Daytripper, are interested in it, or whether you've been made interested in it by this video in the comments below. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for watching. This has been For the Love of Comics, and I'll see you at the next video.